Welcome to 2024. Yeah, before you get excited, let me tell you, you better buckle up, buttercup. I'm not a prophet or a son of a prophet, so I don't know what is going to happen in 2024. But I got to tell you, I have some concerns. I mean, this is an election year, right? And we've had these before, and there's no reason to think this will be any worse than before. But there will certainly be untold finger pointing and name calling and cage fighting that's going on in the political arena, and that is the reason for some concern. Financially, I got to tell you, it's a crazy world out there. Culturally, I'm not sure there's too many boxes we can erase or too many things we can overturn, but I'm always surprised at things we start reinventing. So culturally, who knows what's going to happen? Financially, it feels more like a casino than Wall Street. The financial people that I talk to are living by the slogan, survive to 25. And they're just trying to make it through. And technologically, I mean, it is, we don't even know. It's impossible for us to predict what's going to happen next. All we know is it's going to happen faster than we can imagine. I can foresee a day in this coming year when you won't need me anymore. You just go, hey, give me a 10,000 word message on John 14 that sounds like Pastor Dave, and 20 seconds later, it'll be talking to you. I mean, I've got a shelf life here, apparently, technologically and globally. I mean, I'm used to growing up with wars and rumors of wars, but there's real wars going on. There's people fighting and dying around the globe every single day. And we're right on the razor's edge of a global conflict that I don't think any of us really are prepared for or can even comprehend. It was just in January of 2020, I didn't see what was coming just a few months later. We don't know what is ahead. But I think we have good reason to be concerned. But there's also a reason to be encouraged. And the reason to be encouraged is that I know that God does his best work in times of crisis, and that the church flourishes in adversity. And as the church grows, historically, churches have a tendency to migrate into one or two forms in times that are difficult. In difficult days, the churches kind of form around two ideas. One is what I call the fortress idea. People gather together, they find their spiritual home in a place where everyone is just like them. It's a place where you go and there's a clear set of, this is what we believe, these are how we behave, these are the things we do and the things we don't do. And you feel real good when you're in that community because you peer over the fortress wall and you see the chaos of the world around you and you say, but at least we're safe here with people who are like us. And it's really affirming because you realize, A, you're not alone, and B, you're not crazy. Because all the other people are believing the same things that you are and agreeing with the same things. And in a time of crisis, that fortress feels real safe and real comfortable. Now, there's some liabilities with it. You make some trade-offs to be in that kind of homogeneity, in that kind of uniformity. You have to go along to get along. You have to fake it till you make it. But for the most part, it's a refuge. It's a safe haven from the uncertainty and the chaos of the world. And churches in times of crisis kind of rally around that fortress idea. There's another type of church, and these are churches that anchor themselves in spirituality, in sort of the traditions, the transcendent realities, the timeless truths. The kind of churches where if you go into that church, they're saying the same prayers and singing the same songs that your grandparents did. They're doing the same things every Sunday. It doesn't matter whether you're a church in Texas or church in Illinois or church in Prague. They're all doing the same things. The liturgies and the rituals and the traditions are written down and formed and carved in stone. And they're beautiful places. They're these cathedrals of hope. And they anchor people in a world that relentlessly changes. Without our permission and without our desire, a world that's constantly changing, a church that is anchored spiritually in transcendent and timeless truths becomes a safe haven. And those spiritual practices, those rote religious remembrances are an anchor point in people's lives. Now, obviously, the liability of that is you can just go through the motions. And your spirituality just becomes a lucky rabbit's foot that if you rub it or you cross your fingers and hope to die, and hope not to die, you get what you need. And there's sort of a spiritual superstition that can kind of grow up in those. But they're still wonderful places. And don't get me wrong, both of these things are necessary and they're valuable, particularly in difficult days, in days of uncertainty. But this place is a different kind of place. Riverbend, I believe God raised up to be a place in between the two. I like to think that we take the best of both. We take the best of the refuge, and we take the best of the looking out for each other and having things in common, and we take the best of the timeless traditions and the deep spiritual truths, and we bring them into a place for people who have no place. See, Riverbend is called to be a church for people who don't like church. Riverbend is called to be a place of grace, a place in between. Now, the problem is that that's a messy place. It's a messy place because it's hard to define. It doesn't fit into categories. There aren't a lot of boxes to check. And it's a messy place because, frankly, the inmates are running the asylum. But it's a place for the bruised and the battered and the broken and the bored. It's a place for the misfits and the outcast. It's the place for those who have no other place. It's a church for those who don't like church. And I believe it is a high calling, particularly in times of uncertainty and times of difficulty. While it's difficult to be this kind of place, a place of grace, it is a well-founded calling. And I want to begin 2024 by looking at the spiritual DNA, the roots, the foundations of why we do what we do. Why is Riverbend the way Riverbend is? Because if you want to find one chapter in the Bible that describes the calling of Riverbend Church, it's Luke chapter 15. In the 15th chapter of the book of Luke, Jesus tells 3 stories. And these are stories that describe the calling of Riverbend Church. They are the story of the lost sheep, the story of the lost silver, and the story of the lost son. Over these coming weeks, I want us to start 2024 by revisiting our calling, our destiny, our purpose, and our mission. And so today we want to begin with the first story in Luke 15, the story of the lost sheep. But before we begin that story, would you pray with me for a moment? Father in heaven, I would ask that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart would be pleasing in your sight, and that you would use your word spoken by your servant and anointed by your Spirit to challenge us to be a place of grace. May we who have been healed be the healers. Those who have been rescued be the rescuers, and may the sheep be the shepherds. Pray that for myself, and for my family, and for each of us here. For I ask that in Jesus' name. Amen. This drawing is a colored pencil drawing that I did back in 1988 or 89. And it was a drawing that I had to do. It was art therapy for me. You see, I was a young pastor at a fortress church, a Bible church in Richardson, Texas, and I had no business being a pastor. I was terrible at it. In fact, I never wanted to be a pastor. I realized I had spent 8 years in theological study, and I had 4 more years to go, and the reality was I knew I wasn't pastor material. I had seen great pastors. I had known great pastors, and I realized I was not one of them. And I made this promise. I made this promise to Diane, and I made this promise to God. And I said, I will do anything God calls me to do, and I will go anywhere God wants me to go. But I had my fingers crossed behind my back when I said it, because I would do anything except to be the pastor of a church. Well, God, who doesn't honor fingers crossed behind your back, took me up on my promise and called me to be a pastor of a church in Richardson, Texas, and I was making a mess of it. In fact, I was asked to resign twice by the church board in 3 years. I got fired 2 times in my first 3 years on the job. But there were enough people there who said, no, we want to continue to give Dave a chance. Maybe he'll figure it out. And I know some of you are sitting there going, he still hasn't figured it out. But the reality was that God called me to do this thing that I was uncomfortable with. Called me to stretch myself. And I did this drawing because it was a catharsis. It was an art therapy, because in this drawing, I was visualizing what I believed my calling to be. I didn't want to just be a shepherd who stood around with a bunch of sheep that chewed on each other and smelled bad. I wanted to be that avant-garde guy. I wanted to be that Delta Force operator that swung out of helicopters, and I imagined myself hanging from a cliffside, just holding on for dear life so that I could reach the one sheep, the one that everyone else had given up on. The one that had fallen so far away that no one thought they would ever come back. That's where I wanted to be. I wanted to be on the front lines. I wanted to be mixing up with the atheists and the agnostics and the academics. I wanted to be in the argument. I wanted to be on the front lines. I didn't want to be a shepherd watching sheep eat grass. And so I drew this picture, kind of. This is what I was longing for. And in the bottom corner of the picture, when I was done drawing it, I put my initials, DH, and then I put the letters LK15, 4. Luke 15, verse 4. You see, in Luke chapter 15, Jesus is called out. And the chapter begins by pointing out that Jesus was spending his time with the tax collectors, and I like how the NLT translated, notorious sinners. These are my people. He was spending his time with the tax collectors and the notorious sinners. And it says in verse 2 that the Pharisees and the religious teachers of the law, the spiritual bureaucrats, the professionally pious people of the day, well, they began to complain. They began to say, oh, no, you can't hang out with the unwashed masses, with these unclean people. Look what he's doing. He's even eating with them. You see, they understood that association meant affirmation. And so Jesus, just by being there, was saying what you're doing is okay. They didn't understand what he was doing at all. Now, before we throw these people under the bus, just hold on for a second. We are those people. We are the pious few. We are the frozen chosen. We are the people who are inclined to believe that the things we believe are right. And they were the same way. Before we throw them under the bus of judgment, you realize that they were sincere. They were sincere like us. Their desires to please God were just like our desires. They were fashioned from the same thing. They never set off to be bigots. They never set off to to be outside of God's design. They were sincerely doing the best that they could, just like us. So Jesus doesn't attack them and dismantle them. And he doesn't do that with us either. But he tells them a story. In verse 3, it says, Jesus told them a story, and he tells them a story about a shepherd. He said, imagine if you were a shepherd, and you had 100 sheep. And one day you noticed that one of your sheep was missing. And he said, if you're a shepherd worth your salt, you would go find that missing sheep. You would leave the 99 in the wilderness, out in the open, and you would do whatever it took to find your lost sheep. And then when you finally found it, you would put it on your shoulders and you would joyfully carry it home. And as soon as you got home, you would call all your friends and your neighbors and you would say, come and celebrate with me, because my sheep that was lost has now been found. And then he says, oh, in the same way, let me tell you this. There is more rejoicing in heaven when one sinner repents and returns to God than when 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed away. If you're like me, you hear that story, you go, yeah, Jesus, give it to them. Lay the smack down. They understand that. They're not good shepherds. They wouldn't go for, they'd leave the one. Oh, yeah, just beat them up, Jesus. The problem is he's talking to me. He's not just talking to them, he's talking to us. And in this story, there is a core diagnostic. Jesus is highlighting a spiritual mind virus that infects every person on the planet. Doesn't matter whether you identify yourself as religious or you identify yourself as secular. We all are infected with the same moral mind virus. And it's the virus of comparison. You can be an atheistic scientist, or you can be a committed Christian theologian. You can be devoted to your religious practices or not believe that there is any God. But the reality is we all establish a moral value based on our perspective. And we look at the world and we say, I may not be perfect, but at least I'm not as bad as that guy. And this morality of comparison is such a powerful mind virus that it affects us and we don't even realize it. So that the religious Pharisees and you and I are guilty of the same thing. We compare and we measure ourselves. Primarily, I think it's anthropologically essential for us. It's Darwinian. It is survival of the fittest. I know I don't have to be perfect, I just have to be better than you. And it comes from our latent insecurities and our pathological need for affirmation. And so we find affirmation in the condemnation or in the criticism of others. It's like the two men walking through the jungle and a lion jumps out. And the one guy says to the other guy, he says, run! And the other guy says, we can't outrun a lion. He said, I don't have to outrun the lion, I only have to outrun you. And this is how we go about our life. And in this story, Jesus is highlighting the spiritual mind virus that is so infected in us, we don't even realize that we do it. Now, the problem is, if you look at verse 7, you go, well, wait a minute, Jesus makes a comparison. In verse 7, he says, in the same way, when one sinner repents and returns to God, there's more rejoicing in heaven than for the 99 who remained faithful and have never strayed. It's more than, it's a comparison. It's like, whoa, hold on, Dave. What's going on here? Do you mean to tell me if this is true, then I'm doing this whole thing wrong? Because if there's more joy in heaven for the one who returns, then I should just live in a full free fall. and I should just do whatever I want. I should literally live like hell all the days of my life until I'm just about to hit zero and then pull the chute and glide into heaven, not just for a safe landing, but to the standing O of the chorus of people who say, we never thought we'd see you here. You mean, is that what he's saying? We know that's not what he's saying. So what is he saying? Well, there's another way to translate it, and if I were going to pick a fight with the translators, I would say that the word hopos there it doesn't have to mean more, it can mean as much. So literally, you could translate verse 7 as, there is as much rejoicing for one as there is for the 99. And that paradigm would have blown the minds of the religious people enough. But I don't think it's the translation that's the problem. I think it's the tone of Jesus' voice. And that's hard to translate. It's kind of eisegetical. You can't say Jesus had a smirk on his face when he said it. But he said it kind of like this. Yeah, okay. Let me give you this example. You want to live by comparison? Is that how you want to measure whether or not you're good enough? I'll give you a comparison. I'll give you something to deal with in this way, in this same way. Let me give you a comparison, since you're blinded by your own comparisons. You see, the depth of what Jesus is talking about in that story is embedded in a vaccine. There's a vaccine embedded in this story. And I realize this is a metaphor, and if metaphors are not meant to be taken literally, it wasn't literally a celebration in heaven that had 99 people and one person. It wasn't just a 99. It's an illustration. It's a metaphor. But embedded in the metaphor is a clue to what vaccinates us against the mind virus. Because you know what the chief symptom of the mind virus of comparison is? It's two words: either or. Because comparison thinking begins with this idea that the world is divided into one thing or another. It's either or. It's good or bad. It's right or wrong. It's righteous or unrighteous. It's believing or unbelieving. It's saved or unsaved. It's either or. And the antidote to the either or is embedded in the story. And the first clue is in verse 4. In verse 4, it says that the shepherd left the 99 in the wilderness. And if you pay attention to that, you go, ooh, that's a crummy shepherd. What kind of shepherd abandons the flock? What kind of shepherd leaves the flock behind to go search for the one? Now again, we're stretching the metaphor, and there may be a solution in that shepherds very rarely worked alone. Shepherds often worked in pairs or in threesomes or as families. So maybe there were other shepherds, and the one shepherd left the shepherds. That's possible. Maybe he had a wonderful sheepdog. Maybe it's possible that the word there means out in the open. It doesn't mean wilderness. It can mean desert. It can mean wilderness. It can mean open. And maybe he didn't go far enough away that they were ever in danger. But he had to go search for the sheep. He had to go some distance, and he always kept an eye open, kept listening for them. It's possible to understand it that way, but I don't think that's what it means. I think what it means is that Jesus trusted the sheep. The shepherd trusts the sheep. You know what it means? It's not either or, it's both and. We are both the sheep and the shepherds. The way that God has designed the church is he has said that the healed are going to be the healers. The sheep are going to be the shepherds. You are responsible to care for and look out for each other. This is kind of reinforced down in the next verse, where it says that the shepherd, once he finds the sheep, he puts him on his shoulders and he joyfully carries him. In an atemporal sense, we're still being carried by the shepherd because we're not home to heaven yet. And so he's still carrying us. He is with us, joyfully working among us. I am not the shepherd. I work with the shepherd. And I work with the shepherds. See, the difficult thing for us to understand is it's not either or. It's both and. Because if we're ever going to deal with the mind virus of this idea that we have to judge everybody and we have to be critical of it's supposed to be this way or that way, it's better than or worse than this. If we're ever going to really come to terms with that and free ourselves of that virus, we have to take the vaccine of both and. It's the vaccine of grace. This is how grace operates. This is why it's so messy. Because the sheep are the shepherds. See, I didn't understand that when I was doing this drawing. When I was doing this drawing, I was the shepherd. That was me. My left hand was on the rock. I was holding on to the rock. The rock was the word. The rock was the things that I knew. But I was stretched out. I was reaching for the one who everyone else thought was too far gone. I wanted to connect with the one who everyone else had given up on. And why did I want to do that? I didn't even realize it. Because that's me. Because I'm not just the shepherd, I'm also the sheep. Because I'm the one that he reached out for. I'm the one that he fought for. I'm the one that he searched for. And so this is the construction of grace. This is the distinctive of Riverbend Church. The distinctive of Riverbend Church is that we are the church where the sheep are the shepherds, where the inmates are running the asylum. A church for the misfits and the outcasts and for the people who are disregarded, for the people who don't fit in anywhere else. It's the church for the people who don't like church. It's the place for people who have no other place, just like me. I didn't realize that 18 years ago when I was invited to come here to Riverbend Church to be the second pastor of Riverbend Church. I didn't realize that what I was being called to was a place of grace, that what I was being called to was the place that I had been searching for my entire life. It was a place that I needed more than it needed me. And I realized that I was called to that place in between, to that place in the middle. Not quite the fortress and not quite the spiritual sanctuary, not the cathedral or the refuge, but the best of both. The place that's messy and hard to define. Place that welcomes in the strays, that seeks out the least likely. Place where the healed are the healers and the rescued are the rescuers and the sheep are the shepherds. This is what Riverbend is. We are called to be that place in between, the place of grace, the place of both and. I don't know what 2024 is going to hold. I'm sure there'll be plenty of chaos. There'll be plenty of reasons to be concerned. I don't know politically how things are going to shake out. I know it's going to get rougher before it gets better. I know that there's going to be a lot of name calling and hand wringing and cage fighting. I know that culturally we're going to keep experimenting with things. We're going to keep pushing the boundaries. That's inevitable. It's what we do. I know financially, it's kind of a crapshoot. Just hang on and try to be wise, do the right things, be generous, be careful, be good stewards. Don't know what's going to happen technologically. I may just come here and push a button and then you listen to a message. Who needs Dave? We have AI, Dave. I don't know what's going to happen globally. I don't know what kind of world my children and my grandchildren are entering into. But I do know this. We were raised up, we were fashioned, we are called for times such as these. welcome to 2024.